and welcome to the August 31st special board meeting of Everett Public Schools Board of Directors. Tonight, I don't have my board docs pulled up, so I don't have the exact words. But tonight we're going to get an overview and update. Okay, I'm going to let Dr. Salzman give us an overview of tonight's agenda.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, Board of Directors, and the public this evening. Good evening. This evening, the board will have an opportunity to review and discuss our school stakeholder annual survey.
Okay, we'll go ahead and if directors are okay, we'll approve the agenda with general consent. And go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Bowman.
Good evening, President Mason, directors, and Dr. Salzman. I am very honored this evening to be co-presenting our school stakeholder annual survey. And this evening, we're going to be sharing some highlights from our data from our survey with an expected outcome for board directors to learn more about what our students and families are sharing about student relationships, belonging, as well as how students and families feel about school safety. So let me bring up let me do this first. Share. Here we are. So this evening, our study session helps us to achieve our strategic plan priority student outcome of strengthening student wellness, engagement, and safety. Tonight, our outcome for this presentation is to share again some just key highlights in two key areas, relationships and belonging, as well as school safety. About midway through this deck, we'll pause for some collaborative reflection and address questions. As we move through the slides, however, we'd really like you to be thinking about the connections you see as a director to the data and our strategic priority. We're really excited to continue our partnership with Panorama Ed, the team who's been supporting our social emotional learning or our SELS survey for the last several years. And this last year, we also used Panorama to gather feedback from students, staff, and families in our school stakeholder surveys. These surveys were done in the fall and spring, and they help to capture the voices of our constituents. This is by far the most comprehensive tool we've used to capture the data for analysis, and these dashboards that Panorama provides for us allow our staff and our leaders in our district the access to data for review and action. The data that we're sharing this evening and in the hard copies and the full report that you'll be provided with after tonight's meeting, is at the fingertips of our building leaders, and they can access this data and actually use it to inform their actions with both their students and their families. I'd like to introduce Aida Conroy, and she's our partner in Panorama. I'm going to move her photo over here so you can see her. And Aida, I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of talk a little bit about our mission tonight.
Wonderful. So first off, tremendous gratitude to everyone in the office, and in particular, Kathy and Shelley, who are, anytime I meet with them, not sure about you all, are just so for their continued commitment to this work and the intentionality and really collaborative nature that they bring to our partnership and our work together. Many of you are familiar with Panorama, but just a brief overview. Our mission is actually quite simple. It's to radically improve education for every student. And we do that in a plethora of different ways. In your district in particular, it's putting data that's going to be extremely meaningful at the fingertips of a range of different stakeholders so that you can work to achieve your goals. My name is Aida Conroy. I'm a member of our teaching and learning team, which is just a fancy way of saying that I work on a lot of professional development and learning for districts across the country, do work with a lot of boards and many of our largest districts. I will quite transparently name that I'm not going to be controlling the slides, so you will hear me say next slide, and I hope that you forgive us. I'm also noticing I've presented often in rooms like this, but I've never been able to also see myself, which is a strange experience. And now I'm noticing you probably noticed the unfinished puzzle behind me. So I'm sorry. All right. So our agenda for today really is to zoom in on a couple of key insights as they relate to your student priority outcomes. And as Shelley mentioned, we really embedded time to process and learn within the insights and connections piece that you're going to see here. We do only have about an hour, so I will be upfront with you and telling you that I'm going to try to keep us as aligned to time while prioritizing the processing and discussion of our data. There'll also be, we have very intentionally left some time for questions and processing, whether that's for me, whether that's for our broader team. So wanted to name that as well. And I do believe that you have the PDF of these slides, so use that as a guide. Feel free to, skip, go one, before or after to, if that's going to support your processing.
So we're very fortunate to have the use of the Panorama survey data. Oops. Let's go back just a few slides. There we go. To use our family survey data tools to be able to capture stakeholder voice. This data actually helps us to not only seek that voice and feedback to create a supportive culture and aligns with our strategic plan, specifically the theme in supportive culture where students are engaged, thrives, and values learning. But in addition, it's also a component of the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, the Academic and Student Wellbeing Recovery Plan. And this allows us to collect that voice to help us identify both student learning and well-being gaps. So this is part of our recovery plan for the state as well.
So wanted to ground here the why of why we're looking at this data in the research of why we actually measure topics like the ones that you're going to see in just a moment. So when students feel connected to their teacher, research tells us that they're 74% more likely to report using strategies to learn more effectively. So first, it's really important to note that correlation does not mean causation. However, these findings present an opportunity to discuss the impact of students' connectedness and their relationships at school, which do have an extensive basis in academic research. And the findings like this one really highlight the role that all caring adults in school communities play to help foster the strong social emotional skills for students. So Carol Dweck notes that in terms of thinking about resilience, that shouldn't just be considered trying harder, but it also includes the continued use and then the application of strategies that are going to help students grow, try new things, take risks, and really learn effectively. In addition to that, there's actually a growing body of research that connects teachers' strong relationships with students and student learning and SEL growth. So our framing for today is at Panorama, we like to think about that data as voice. So you're going to see en masse the voices of different stakeholders across your community, and you are really the narrators, and wanted to name up front that the story is absolutely not finished. This is work that we started in 2016 and that we are committed to as partners in the work. And so we have we're going to go into data first, and then we'll think about voice and how you might narrate that. And then we'll also give you all time to process connections and actions, just like we kind of framed at the start. And so as we look at the data, there are really kind of two themes here. The first, relationships and belonging, and those are going to be student voice data points. And then the second theme there being school safety for hearing from students and from families. And this is at the 10,000-foot view, what we asked of the range of different stakeholders and who we actually heard from. So in the top in blue, you're actually going to see the number of voices. That means folks that took the survey. And then all of the topics that we've collected. And you will, at the end of this presentation, have the full PDF report of every single one of these topics. But like I've mentioned, we're actually going to be zooming in to take a look at just a couple of them that you'll see in green here. And just wanted to name that we're focusing on that supportive culture piece from a student and family voice perspective. So now we're going to move on to the insights and connections. So the first theme is with relationships and belonging. You'll see a set of slides and then we'll pause for discussion and processing around this one theme before moving to our second and final theme. So again, some of you may be familiar with our scoring, but I wanted to provide a visual overview here before you see a bunch of blue bars on your screen. Each of the topics we will discuss today is made up of several questions that were answered by each stakeholder group. So here you're seeing an example for students. Most questions have 5 answer choices, with each answer choice reinforcing the central idea of the question. The percent, and so at the top, you'll notice that the question is how much support do the adults at your school give you? And then you'll see the word support in every single one of the different answer options. The percent favorable for each question is the percentage of respondents that chose either of the 2 most favorable answer choices. So those are the ones highlighted in green. I'll note here that favorable does not include the middle answer choice, or what I like to refer to as the anchor middle choice, because the goal here is to focus in and take an assets-based approach to scoring and to understanding our data. We then take the score from each one of those questions and average them to get a topic score, on the whole. But the question, you'll also see in today's presentation at the topic level what scores were, but we also release the breakdown of what percentage and number of students chose each one of these answer choices. And that really helps us see some of the nuance within one topic. So starting at the highest level, with teacher-student relationships. So this is defined as how supported students feel through their relationships with friends, adults, and friends, family, and adults at school. And so wanted to kind of ground us in our national benchmarks. Like I mentioned, we work with 1,500 different districts. So what's really exciting is that we can kind of compare what the percent favorable in your district to our national data set to help you all understand what does an 81% really mean, or what does a 59% really mean. So I'll model this with the grades 3 through 5 on the left-hand side. So the overall result was 81% favorable for teacher-student relationships, according to students in grades 3 through 5. And compared to all schools in the national data set, that's actually near the 90th percentile on that topic. And then for students in grades 6 through 12, you're at 59%, which is near the 40th percentile on that topic. Wanted to take a deeper dive though to really take a look at how results for both of these student groups have changed over time. One thing that I'll note is you're seeing these grade bands separately because of reading levels, we ask slightly different questions within the same topic, and they're worded differently. It will comfort the ELA or former reading folks, teachers in the room. So when we think about how results have changed over time, something to note is that we're seeing an upward trend since the beginning of our survey administration for both 3 through 5th graders, as well as our 6th through 12th graders. So at 3 through 5, starting several years ago at 73%, landing this spring at 81% favorable. And I think something that's notable is that for the grades 6 through 12, the highest percent favorable was actually in the fall of 2020, and that was at 66%. So this spring, it went down 7 percentage points, but still, this spring was the second highest it had ever been, and the first highest was last fall. And so, that upward trend is continuing. And we know that building teacher-student relationships has been an emphasis throughout the pandemic. So this is a clear celebration to call out. And so these are actually the questions that we asked students for this topic, the topic of teacher-student relationships. Something to notice here is that for both student groups, the highest percent favorable question is related to how respectful their teachers are towards them. And so when we think about what we know about building any relationship, whether that's a relationship that two peers have with one another, that a student has with a counselor, the foundation of that is really respect. And then you can also see, I've kind of ordered them from highest percent favorable to lowest. You can see here that there's kind of the numbers get lower as questions are more related to potentially, if student is walking into class upset, how concerned they're going to be. And what this view really does for our school leaders that have been trained in the platform is that it emphasizes where there may still be room to improve and grow, and it lets us highlight our strengths within each building. And so a leader that has this view might think, we've got the foundation of respect. What might it mean to action plan around some of the other questions and insights that I can glean with these individual questions?
And as Aida mentioned, one of the highlights of this piece is that, this data was collected in a year where we had students in remote for most of the year. And so because our focus was on building relationships, because we knew that would be challenging in a virtual environment, we can really see a lot of this data is super positive. I mean, to have the 3rd through 5th grade students, even in remote instruction, indicate that we're, in the 90th percentile nationally with our data set. That's a huge celebration for our staff and our leaders in our buildings for the work that they've done around fostering those relationships in what could be qualified as probably the hardest year to teach ever. So.
And then we wanted to move from teacher-student relationships to sense of belonging. So zooming in here, I actually wanted to do a different sort of view where you could see for 3rd through 5th graders, the questions that we asked them right alongside that same sort of change over time graph. And so again, seeing a really similar trend of there's a real opportunity to celebrate the sense of belonging data, given how much attention went into that. The highest percent favorable ever actually for 3rd through 5th graders was this past fall, where there was so much going on in your community and our world. And then you're seeing some at the top, the most favorable 2 questions you're seeing at the top, you're noticing that they're right next to the percent favorable. On the right, there's the decrease from the fall, but that's in comparison to the best ever, set of data that 3rd through 5th graders had. So it's in relation to the highest percent favorable recorded for that age group. And so really wanted to emphasize here that during a time of potential isolation, students and caring adults in school buildings, this was emphasized. And so highlighting that 72% in the fall is really exciting to see. And then there's actually a similar sort of trend for the sense of belonging data for 6 through 12. While the overall scores are lower for the 6 through 12 band, and I'll name that is that holds true of our national data set as well around teacher-student relationships and sense of belonging. You're actually noticing here that the highest percent favorable ever here was also in the fall for grades 6 through 12. And one thing that I want to model here, and that we often do during our sessions with educators, is this low inference thinking piece around the difference between the fall and then the dip from into the spring, and trying not to speculate as to why, but really using this data set and as one star in a broader constellation of other data pieces that you have to make to plan intentionally for the beginning of the school and set commitments around sense of belonging based on student voice data from both the fall and thinking about what was going so well, what systems and structures supported our students, and how might we replicate them as we reopen this fall. And this is a commitment that I know there's ongoing work on. I'm not sure if you want to jump in now or kind of save it for later.
Well, I can just briefly overview. I do have some action steps outlined at the end of the slide deck, but there have been a significant amount of work. You can see some of the data where students say, hey, how connected do you feel to the adults at your school? Well, in a virtual environment, that is a real challenge. However, we know that we're utilizing some of this data to actually focus on those first 5 days as the key priority in building relationships and fostering those connections, not just teacher-student, but students to students as well. So we're excited about some of the work that our leaders and staff have planned in the school buildings that are specifically going to address some of these data points.
And then as we center the experiences of every single student in the district, one of the pieces of data that building leaders can plan around is what I like to call our equity dashboard. And this is a screenshot of it for our 3 through 5th graders. So at a high level, this lets us see how certain stakeholder groups responded to a certain topic. So you can see a view for this for a variety of different demographic markers. Here, you're seeing race, ethnicity. You can also see it by grade level, et cetera, et cetera. I like to think about the colors that you're seeing on your screen as a heat map. So across the top in gray, you have the average score across the district. And remember, those are 3 through 5th graders. And you can also see the N count, that group size to the left. And so, for instance, for all of our respondents in 3 through 5th grade, the sense of belonging on average was 69% favorable. Students that were identified as Asian responded 3% more favorable than average. And you can see the N count there as 797 to the left. And you'll notice that that like box is a light green color. And students that were identified as 2 or more races responded 1% less favorably than average. The darker a green square is, the more favorable it is compared to the average in your community. And the darker orange the square is, it means the less favorable than average in your community. And so I try to tell people to stay low inference as they look at this data piece, really consider the group size, and also because our brain has different, you may have, I should say, different kind of thinking patterns around green equals good and red equals bad. It's just a way to view the data in comparison to your own averages. So I'm actually going to pause for about 15 seconds so folks can process this before we look at the same breakdown for 6th through 12th graders. And if there's like a question about like, am I reading this right? Feel free to ask that now. There's no questions. You can head to the next slide. And you're seeing, again, same view, but instead you're seeing responses for 6th through 12th. And so I'm naming that there's many more topics at the top here that you're viewing that we are not focusing on today. So if you're trying to process this, I would suggest taking a look at the differences as they relate to sense of belonging and student relationships or teacher-student relationships. I think we can go to the next one. So we'll take about 5 minutes here to summarize learnings as they relate to relationships and belonging data, and think about how these insights connect to our, I should probably say your, but for tonight I'll say our strategic priorities across the district. So I'll put on a timer for about 5 minutes just to keep us on track for the presentation, but would, certainly opening the floor up to you all.
Directors, I would say if you have something to share or a question or a comment, please just go for it.
So I guess at the end, after we're going to go over some actions, some action items. I guess that's kind of my question is kind of what you do about it, but I don't always know how to encourage and kind of jump into that a bit earlier. I mean, like I think what you were saying, data is voice, and I think this is showing us the students' voice pretty well, and it's sort of identifiable despite some less.
I had a question about some of the 6 through 12 data. How different does that data look when you break it out between middle school and high school? I'm surprised that it's all crunched together just because there's such different phases of like.
I cannot actually speak to the differences between high school and middle school because I've been looking at the aggregate data in where to look for themes. Each school, however, does get their own data, and so depending on that school data, that's where some of the actions that we're talking about really actually help, is they can actually look at here's the aggregate of the district data, and when we think about some of the moves that we make as a district, we utilize that aggregate. But when we disaggregate the data in like a 6-8 band at Heatherwood Middle School, for example, they can actually look at what their specific students say and look for trends in those pieces. So it depends. Some of it is more positive than others, but that's where these principals really can dig into the data dashboard and really look at, well, what are our African American students saying about sense of belonging, or what's happening with our Latino students that they feel so included. And that's the power of those pieces. So today we're looking at the aggregated district, but
I was wondering if maybe, could you address nationally what the difference is between middle and high school?
Aida, I'm going to pass that to you. Can you speak to?
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
Yeah, I can. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, for reporting features, this is kind of like a high level, is generally what we look at 6 through 12, but you can also see like a breakdown of each grade level. So just, pulling up the report now, 6th graders are 39% favorably for sense of belonging. And then there's only 4% variance between the 7th and 12th, or 5% variance between the 7th and 12th graders in that same sort of band. In terms of what we see is true of our national data set, we see higher percent favorable with teacher-student relationships, sense of belonging in the elementary years. It tends to start to kind of drop and tick down for 6th, 7th, and 8th, and then it begins to tick back up. And that's just like the national, trends that we see. And if you all want more, we can certainly send our research report and some more graphs on that.
No, that was exactly what I was interested in. Yeah.
I guess I do have a question. So looking at those slides that we're on, right? So everything, it kind of moved by a point, right? So 37, 38, 37, 38, somewhere in that neighborhood, and all of a sudden it's this huge 5%. Was it something that we did differently? Like the only thing the district changed a lot at that point, right? Like Dr. Saltzman came in, we really focused on students belonging, but I don't know, was there something specific that we did to make that huge jump?
Are you talking about the jump from spring 2019 to fall of 2019, or are you talking about the 5-point jump between fall of 2019 to
fall of 2020?
So fall of 2020, as you recall, last year we were in a virtual environment, and because we were in a virtual environment, there was this significant push for how do we connect with our students. We were grappling with how do we deliver academics, yes, But also we knew that students had been in closure for a significant amount of time where they were in a remote learning instruction. And we were, as a team, looking at what do we do to help foster a sense of belonging. When I go into an in-person classroom, that's an easy thing to, I create a classroom community, I do a class meeting, I work on some social emotional lessons. But when I'm in a virtual environment with screens off, that's a real challenge that our teachers face. And they did an amazing job at helping to connect students and build comfortability level. There were some very creative steps that they used in helping kids to connect with one another and do collaborative work in an environment where collaboration was really difficult. So I would credit some of that increase to the focus on the social emotional learning and the efforts of our building principals and teachers in helping to create that sense of belonging in a really challenging environment. That was a huge, huge emphasis last fall.
So that was 100% virtual, basically, and that was.
Yep.
Correct.
It went down, basically, when it was hybrid. It was like, and that's kind of when that snapshot was taken. So that kind of is the antithesis of what we heard, right? Like, as this narrative, this national narrative, the social emotional impacts of virtual learning, and it looks like there may have been some new habits that did not.
Yes, and I think that one of the pieces, I'm really glad that you called that out, Director Burke, because I think one of the pieces that we are thinking about as we're shifting back into in-person learning is how do we mitigate that loss of sense of belonging. Students were in isolation, and even when they were coming back, it was difficult to navigate. We had staff who were doing an amazing job, but they still lost some of that sense of belonging over the course of several months where they were in a virtual environment. So really what we were looking for is what can we do about that, knowing that our students felt that way in June when the survey was taken. What will we do differently this fall to really help not just build classroom community and inclusivity and really give them that sense of belonging, but also how do we build sustainability throughout that? And so there's a key reason why it's part of our recovery plan, is because this is a really important thing for us to know. We've got kids who struggled, and so how do we help to support them, not just academically, but socially and emotionally?
So on the same topic, have you broken out spring 2021 by remote versus hybrid? So folks that have chosen to stay completely remote in the spring versus those who hybrid?
We have not looked at.
Yeah, I can speak to it a little bit. It's not in this presentation, but we do have, just like there's the heat map for race ethnicity, a building leader can actually see how the hybrid group 1 compared to hybrid group 2 compared to remote only responded to sense of belonging overall. So I just pulled up the 3 through 5th grade out of curiosity. And so students in hybrid groups 1 and 2 responded, as of this spring, 6 and 7% more favorably for student relationships, but there was only a 1% difference across all of the groups for hybrid group 1, group 2, and the remote learners for teacher-student relationships. So a school building administrator would be able to kind of see that same view and then plan accordingly based on what was going really well, how to continue that momentum, and then support the students where potentially their learning environment could be more supportive.
And there's several different factors that are some students have the teachers change and their social networks change and everything, but not entirely unexpected.
I have a question. Is this x-axis correct, or was there a data point missing in some regards? We have spring 2019, we have fall 2019.
Yep, good question. We didn't administer surveys in those periods.
Okay.
So the data is missing.
Okay. I was just wondering, was that just continually going up, or what to expect in that particular time period?
Good question.
I do see the fall 2020, that was a very good year because, a good outcome for a very challenging year when we were all, remote learning. and, I remember that, when we would do IRs, and we would see some screens off and wonder, how do you know those students are there? What are we doing to support the students? And even so in the high school, this 6 through 12 includes that, where some of our student rep would say that they would have different kinds of activities during the day in which, you would go to pause class, or in other, they have like homeroom periods, and they would ask questions, how do you know, how are you feeling today? And our teachers went way out and trying to assess how their students are doing. And that was one of the positive things that I saw during that particular time, to ensure that kids were doing okay. That's one reason why I was just wondering if that spring of 2020 was showing some type of upward, because we were still engaged in that type of, assessment of ensuring that kids were doing well.
Yeah, that's a great note. We didn't administer in the fall of 2020, so the data points that you see are just in relation to the last data point, probably for obvious reasons, but only to keep us on track for time. We do have one more collaborative talk time, so this doesn't have to be the end all be all. But I'll move us to the second theme around stakeholder safety feedback. And so here, for the first time, we're actually going to see kind of a crosswalk of how and this screenshot is a view that all of our school, leaders have, of how do our family members feel about school safety compared to our students. And so you're able to see as well kind of how students in 3 through 5 versus 6 through 12 are doing, if you're somebody who's taking a look at this at the district level. And this helps us see, trends across groups. Something to name here in particular is that school safety and the questions that are related to those topics are actually surrounding the perceptions of that physical safety and that psychological safety at school, knowing that, safety is a broad topic. And so one thing to really highlight and call out here is that for students in grades 3 through 5 and 6 through 12, the averages there very close, or at least closer than what we've seen in some of the other topics. And a huge celebration here is that you're falling actually in the 99th percentile when you compared to our national data set for both of these. I didn't grab that screenshot because I wanted to have you see the crosswalk, but just wanted to voice that over. So especially when we think about all the tremendous work that went into those relationships and that belonging, safety is really very much like respect is that foundation. So you've got a really impressive foundation to build off for the fall. And then again, seeing some changes over time and seeing an even larger jump from fall 2019 to spring 2021, I should call out, which at first I actually kind of went through and anticipated that we would get a question around, well, what is it because students were learning in a hybrid model or at home, and that's maybe what's kind of changed here. For 3 through 5th graders, there was not a significant difference between the hybrid group 1, which was 77%, hybrid group 2, which was 78, and at home, which was 80. So not a ton of variance there, some, but not, a massive difference. And then for 6 through 12, remote only students were at 74% favorable, and all other options were 75 and 76% favorable. So really exciting to see here is that whether students were either, however they were learning, whether that was in a hybrid model or at home, they were feeling both physically safe and psychologically safe. A couple of things here, and I know that Shelley, you can jump in, is that you all have hired more school counselors, 3 different social workers for the district, and have made continued investments in safety.
That's
And I know we'll
correct.
talk about it a little bit more in closing as well.
Right, well, psychological and physical safety, and I think that's an important component to really call out, is that even in a remote environment, we fostered safe environments where students were able to take risks, and that is a really important call out on this. This is great data to celebrate for our staff, in knowing that they continue to cultivate those environments, virtual or hybrid or otherwise, in helping to create a safe environment for our students.
And this is the crosswalk of questions. You're seeing grades 3 through 5 right next to grades 6 through 12. Something to call out here right before we look at the families, there'll be a more visual cue as well, is percent favorable is like not only the most positive answer choice, but it's how we want folks to be like feeling and responding to these questions. So coming up, if, for instance, like with the question, how often do you worry about violence at your school? 72% of 3 through 5th grade students are not saying often or all the time. It's kind of reversed because we're focusing in on the aspects that are asset based. It might be easier to turn to the next slide for a visual. So for instance, you're seeing the full breakdown of responses for overall, how unsafe does your child feel at all? We consider favorable when an adult answers, my child is not unsafe at all, or slightly unsafe. So I'll give folks a minute to process that. These are the questions that we actually asked family members about how they felt about their students' school safety. Again, capturing that psychological and that physical aspect. And so hopefully that should clear up anything around kind of like, but how might I interpret this? I like to think about the percent favorable as how we want folks to be responding. And so we would be remiss if we didn't kind of attempt to capture and name that cultural awareness and students' perception of diversity and inclusion at their school is another key part of safety. And so we pulled out 2 questions from the topic diversity and inclusion, which was administered only to the 6 through 12 students. So this is capturing just their voices and insight. And the 2 questions were, how fairly do adults at your school treat people from different races, ethnicities, and cultures? And they responded 84% favorably. And then how fairly do students at your school treat people from different races, ethnicities, and cultures? So capturing that adult piece as well as that student piece. And so these 2 questions are not included in our school safety kind of report, but instead they're coming from the diversity and inclusion topic that we asked students about. And so we really wanted to share out kind of some of the specifics around the work to bring cultural awareness, and that this is such a positive win to see as we help to support building psychological safety in school for each and every student. I'm not sure, I would know that one piece that has been, there's been a tremendous amount of ongoing work on has been bringing in consultants focused on those equitable student outcomes and what we do in our daily practices that might have a positive impact on outcomes for students. To the right-hand side, you're actually seeing a breakdown by race ethnicity of how students across different race ethnicity groups responded to the topic of diversity and inclusion. So we know that cultural awareness, was impacted last year because of remote instruction. However, we're fortunate to have, the support in continuing the work. I'm not sure if you want to add in anything there,
I
Shelley.
do, actually. We're really very fortunate to have been working with Bill Delacruz with all of our schools. And I appreciate the board's support and the superintendent's support in helping to move that work forward, because it is critically important. You can see how this data as a building level leader would be really key in helping you to deep dive into what happens in your schools and how can we help to foster an environment where we have more equitable student outcomes. So this is a key piece of data that leaders in our buildings are using with their staff in identifying what can we do to help to support increasing those equitable outcomes for our students as well.
And then we'll have another 5 minutes to process that school safety piece, or draw any important connections before we head into additional action updates and more Q&A.
I mean, I was just gonna suggest that we keep moving. Just the action items and kind of, supporting that input, that question.
Oh, okay, I didn't have a question, I guess I have a wondering, because I looked at the data and, well, I guess first thing, the answers, when you look at the page that has the answer distribution 24, and just the way that's worded, not at all unsafe, that wording feels funky to me, because it's wording it, instead of saying, do you feel safe? And it's like very safe versus, it's in a negative way, so not at all unsafe. And so, I don't know, that just feels like it feels wonky to me, so I don't feel not safe versus I feel safe. And so I'm just pointing that out. I'm not
Sure.
a data person, but I just feel like sometimes the way we word questions and the way we word answers influences how people respond. And so this to me feels negative. So if I'm just looking at this and I've got, hit on one hip and I'm doing another thing and I'm trying to stir a pot and I'm like, yeah, no, I'm safe. So I just want to make sure that when we're ordering these answers, we're making it as easy as possible to say, yes, I feel safe. Yes, my kid feels very safe, versus not at all unsafe. It's like a little negative. So just putting that in reverse. The other thing is I just, talking to so many parents and students of color, and really parents in general, this kind of tells me, I think, what I've been hearing, which is that my kids felt safer at home. My kids felt more respected at home, because I think if I'm reading these numbers right, we had that kind of jump from 55% in the fall of 2019 to 75% in spring of 2021, in terms of feeling safe and that favorable, sort of the same was for our, 6th and 12th, 3rd through 5th. And and even the DEI question, I'm assuming that DEI question was just this year, so the first year we asked those two questions, or am I wrong about that? Is there a metric that shows how that's gone year over year?
With the diversity and inclusion?
Yeah.
I can't speak to whether this was included on the last survey or if this was a new addition to this survey. Do you have that info?
I can bring it up right now. For diversity and inclusion,
Well, quality
we
is
actually, we only administered this spring. So
okay.
there's only one data point for diversity and inclusion, and then cultural awareness and action. So it'll be interesting to crosswalk what we know to be true. We'll administer again this fall and see the differences between those two environments and potential impact that you're bringing up here.
That's a high number, and I'm just saying that's a high number, which is good. I'm complete kudos to us in district, because when our kids were, potentially cameras off and literally just focusing on learning, right? Just evaluate me for what I'm producing, what I'm doing, not what I'm wearing, not how my hair is, not how I'm relating and sitting and interacting with my peer, but simply evaluate me. And it seems like potentially they felt, whether or not it was true or not, they felt safer, they felt more included.
And well, and I also think that, so one of the things that we spend a lot of time discussing is that data is neutral. And so when we make those little inferential thinking pieces, we think, okay, so what does this data tell us? This data says that students felt like that people treat people from different races, ethnicities, or cultures, and they responded 84% favorably. So we don't just say, Yahoo, that's awesome data, and then never revisit that. What we really do is we dig into this data, and then we solicit additional voice on top of that. So as we're returning to in-person instruction, we're encouraging leaders to dig into their data and not just say, hey, awesome, check the box, we got an 84%, but really, what are we doing to help connect with those kids? Is it that they were in a virtual environment? Is it that maybe their teacher who did a lot of the Zoom with the screens off also did home visits and connected with those students and made them feel comfortable in different ways or allowed them to respond in different modalities? So there's a lot of wonderings. Like, good data makes us wonder different things, that makes us take different actions in developing plans for how do we dig deeper and get more student voice, ask different questions to really ensure that we're taking the right action steps with that.
Yeah, well, and thank you for that, because I think this data does give voice to what I've heard in the community, right? Like, this is what I've heard, this is, we feel safer, we feel this is a good thing. Now, not good in the sense we don't want to go back to school, but good in the sense of, as one parent put, my child has dignity. He's found dignity in his education, and that was from a parent at Cascade, and I thought, and it kind of sat with me for a minute, because I hadn't even heard that word being used in the context of education and its impact on education, and I don't know that the parent ever thought of it, but it made sense, and this is giving voice to some of those parents. So thank you.
I think also, just to add to that, I was surprised to read a article, a survey that was done that showed that they were trending less bullying in a remote environment, because everyone thought, oh, they're gonna be on their devices all day and it's gonna be awful. And really what the correlation they made is the bullying really starts in schools and on campuses and then follows kids home. And the fact that it declined during the pandemic, my wondering is, and what you both addressed, is what part is here, this giant jump, pandemic related, and the very different way that we were delivering education, and what part of it is the intentionality of what we've done in our district to make sure that students feel safe.
Yep, and I think to dovetail on that, I think one of the most important things that we're thinking about, especially in these first 5 days, is what are we doing to set the bar, to take what we've learned from pandemic and virtual instruction, and can we then translate that so we are far more intentional around creating psychologically and physically safe environment, so that we do have, we can seize the opportunity to really connect with our students and build sustainability. So when we take the time on the front end to build those connections and establish good relationships with our students and inter-student relationships, you find that you have more sustainability for those positive student relationships as the year progresses. So I think that the key word that I think about when I think about those first 5 days is not necessarily just the social emotional, but it is the intentionality within which we are teaching those skills to our students so that we can build sustainable success for the entire year. So in fact, if that's all right, I think I'll move on to the next piece here, which is the action update. Let me move Aida back out of the way here. But the exciting thing for us is really that you can look at this data and you can identify, here are the things that we have reported, the key highlights that we reported tonight. But really what I want to share is our next steps, because we get that feedback data, and like I said, it's not checking a box, it's really talking about how do we utilize that voice that we've gathered from our students and families, and we owe it to our constituents to actually take action on what they've said. So I want to take just a minute to share with you some of our next steps that we've either taken or we're preparing to take. That first step is really sharing that data with our leaders. We spent time at our Summer Leadership Institute unpacking the data and sharing with them not just the district aggregate, but also their individual school data. And then we built in time for them to collaboratively process that data. So what does this data mean to me in my building at Cascade High School or at Garfield Elementary? for them to be able to collaborate with their peers really helped them to develop their own learning about not just what the data said, but also strategize about what actions might come from that. And then finally, the assessment and research department continues to help to support building leaders and their leadership teams in unpacking that data, pulling additional data to support that work. Those first 5 days priority, this data has really underscored the importance for making sure that we have those first 5 days prioritized with the social emotional learning in the classroom. We're very grateful to have a superintendent and a board who've made that reconnection with our students and building relationships the priority for those first 5 days as we return to in-person learning environments. The data really emphasizes the importance of using time to build that school and classroom culture for students as they return to the classrooms. However, I just want to call out, we also don't want to just say that social emotional learning is limited to those first 5 days. It is an ongoing embedded process in our classrooms, within our daily instruction. And those social emotional learning activities really help to build in some of those powerful routines like number talks in math, or I'm using accountable talk practices, or even classroom meetings where kids can socialize and connect with each other, and really focus in on some of the soft skills that they learn in their social emotional learning curricula, like Second Step. But those are the skills that are helping to build sustainable success in that classroom environment and help them to build the long-term success for all students. Our next steps too involve a little bit more of a different theme in our strategic plan, and that is the community engagement. So I know that we've shared with you before that, that we've been working with the Family Engagement Advisory Committee, which is a group of leaders, working with a consultant that we've been able to consult with, that is working on how do we reach out, how do we learn from the pandemic and reach out to our families and communities in a more authentic way. And really helping our leaders to develop specific action plans for family engagement, as well as school and department action plans. So it is a real honor to be able to work with our staff in unpacking this data, but really thinking about how we can engage our families and our community in support of the social, emotional, and academic support of our students. We're really, really fortunate to, I just would like to thank the board for the support in our new strategic plan, and really helping to identify those key student priority outcomes. Our school stakeholder annual survey data is really just an amazing opportunity for us to, to really support both the academic needs of our students, but really also the social emotional development, as well as increasing our two-way communication with stakeholders throughout the district and community. And our strategic plan, we focus on those student priority outcomes, because if you spend any time in any of our cabinet meetings and you listen to Dr. Salzman, he always is mentioning, it's about our kids. It's about our kids. And that's really the focus of not just our strategic plan, but the work in which we do here. So we're really fortunate to have that mission and that vision from the top down, and our leaders are continuing to utilize the data to help really meet the needs of our kids. And I think with that, we have some space here for some questions.
So one thing that really struck me as Ms. Conroy called out was that kids at home, kids in remote learning, we're still about the same level of feelings of safety as our industry. And that actually surprised me. I would assume it would be higher. I don't think that we're ever going to get to 100%. There's lots of factors that go into that. But what I'm going to be really interested in going forward is virtual academy data, and then what can we do, what can we do to help those kids at home feel safe? Is it housing insecurity, food insecurity? What is going on?
So I just had a question about the family engagement, development, or whatever.
Yes.
Is that, or have we done that before?
I don't believe that we have done specific family engagement plans. I think that there's been, in school improvement plans, there have been in the past, how are you communicating with your families? One thing that we've really learned over the course of the last, I'd say 16 months, is that we needed to partner with our families because we were not going to be able to educate our kids if we couldn't. And what we have taken from that is, hey, there are ways for us to do more than just the website, more than just the newsletter or the connected call home. We found opportunities to actually meet with parents while they're in their living rooms at 7 o'clock and have interactive dialogue and discussion. So our staff and our leaders have learned a great deal around that. And so that is why we brought in Mike Collins to help work and coach through leaders of, so what did we learn? How can we now take that and develop very intentional actions around fostering a deeper connection and two-way communication with our families? So I would say we've had them in the past, but we have actually done a lot more intentionality, and it's far more meaningful now than I think it's ever been in the past.
And so to just bring as an example, kind of coming up the virtual academy, so let's say that a parent chooses to be in person, right, traditional in person, but they still want to do their conferences or their interaction via Zoom, right, like, so that maybe that piece of it works, that, I'm not saying whatever, but just hypothetically speaking, would that be possible? Are we gonna make allowances, or is that up to each teacher, or?
Yeah, that's a great question, and actually it is a piece that we've been thinking about a lot. And so when we actually had some conversations with our teachers this summer in bargaining, we actually built in opportunities for teachers to be able to meet parents' needs. If a parent says, I'd like to come and do my conferences in person, you can come and do that in person. Here's your time slot, just like we would do traditionally in parent-teacher conferences. There are other opportunities, however, that if a parent says, listen, my lunch break, I can take it at 1:30, can I Zoom in and have a conference? And we can accommodate that as well. So it's really been a great collaborative effort with our teachers and our leaders and our staff into saying, hey, what could we do to help to facilitate better communication? How can we do that in a way that might actually be really convenient for parents, right? So there's been some great brainstorming and collaboration, but that was a great opportunity for us. We learned, hey, we could Zoom with parents at 7 o'clock, and this actually is a really meaningful parent-teacher conference. And so how do we build that? How do we take that into the next year? So it's been, we have made some accommodations, and we've made some changes in some of our past practice to really to better meet the needs of our families and support of our students. Yeah.
I'm very grateful of that. I am so happy that we have learned throughout these trying 2 years, and they have been a challenge, but we've learned so much because of it. And those things that we have learned, I hope, my goal is that we don't just throw them away with bathwater, but that we incorporate some of those things that we've learned, the skills we've developed, because we've done so much to help involve so many people, because they couldn't be involved any other way. And I'm glad we're going to Zoom forward. We're going to continue that, because we'll meet so many more parents as a result. And that's fantastic.
And that's, I think, one of the things that's really beautiful about, doing a strategic plan at the tail end or in the middle of a pandemic. That may seem like a crazy thing, but it has so given us the opportunity to focus our work, to take what we've learned in a really difficult and challenging environment, to take what we've learned and to be able to apply that to better serve our students. The strategic plan has really helped to shape that path that we need to take to service our families in a more, I think, meaningful and engaging way.
If I can do family reading night via Zoom, at night, where I have 60 kids and their dogs and their cats and their parents there, and we're reading through Zoom, what a wonderful thing, if we can continue other opportunities. And not to say that everything can be done that way.
Right.
I wholeheartedly believe the best place for kids to be is in the classroom. But we have learned so much with technology and things that we've done this year. We need to take that forward and continue to integrate it and continue to hone our skills as we go forward. Absolutely. Thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing what's next.
Okay. Any other questions or anything we can answer for you?
One last question that came up for me, especially in regards to safety, is what sort of plans do you have as we identify things for the sort of plans you have involving community partners, like say, Snohomish Health District or law enforcement partner, or service providers, YMCA, those programs like that. Do we have any plans to share this and get rid of kind of some needs that we can't exactly address?
I don't know that we have a data sharing agreement with some of our community partners. However, what I do know is that, like, for example, we, in categorical programs, we work pretty extensively with some of our community services to provide shelter, food, clothing for some of our students who are experiencing homelessness or who need additional support in those service areas. I think it goes without saying that this has been a really challenging year for a lot of families. And so while we don't necessarily share data with them, what we do when we process and analyze our data and we say, hey, we're seeing a need here, and where do buildings process and analyze that data and say, hey, we're seeing this need, how can we reach out to some of those community partners, Housing Hope and things like that, to be able to connect our families with services. So that is a real intentionality, with some intentionality that we do those things. But we'll continue to reach out and partner with our community. Our district directors are pretty effective at doing some of those pieces in helping to ensure that there are resources for our families who need them.
Okay, if there's no further questions, I'd like to thank both of you for an incredible presentation. A lot of great information. I'm not sure where's Miss Conroy joining us from?
I believe, Aida, you're in Illinois, is that right? No,
Chicago. You're right.
Well, if you get out to Everett, we have one of the best puzzle stores in the city. So,
Okay, well now I've got to go. Hopefully, soon.
Thank you so much for your time and for staying up with us. Really,
Of course, my pleasure. Thanks so much, folks.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Be well.
Okay, I think we are adjourned. Okay.